Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's very exciting Free Library of Philadelphia Foundation author event. Thank you all so much for being here. There's much more to come still in our fall season. We have historians, artists, novelists, politicians, and just a reminder that you can register for all of our events at our webpage, freelibraryfoundation.org. I want to say just a few quick words about our organization in general. The Foundation works together with the Free Library to support programming and advance its mission of promoting literacy throughout the Philadelphia region. Of course, as a nonprofit, we are reliant upon your support to help us achieve these goals, so please do consider donating, which you can also do through our website. Again, that's freelibraryfoundation.org. Before we get to tonight's program, there are a few people and organizations that I would like to thank. I'd like to thank Uncle Bobby's, our partner bookseller. You saw them up in the lobby. Let's have a round of applause for Uncle Bobby's. They're wonderful. They provide all the books for our events. They are on site for all of our events. Wonderful partners. And I would also like to thank the Philadelphia Citizen, our media partner. Yeah, why not? Let's hear it for the Citizen as well. And finally, most deserving of a round of applause, I would like to thank our volunteers. They are a dedicated group of library patrons whose loyalty to this program is unmatched. Tonight we have with us Brianna, Indonesia, and Lisa. You would have seen them as you came into the library, as you came into the auditorium this evening. We are so grateful for their support. Tonight we welcome Harmonia Rosales, who is let's hear it for Harmonia as well. I like this crowd. We're excited beforehand. She is an American artist from Chicago whose work depicts and honors African myths and the diaspora. Since the genesis of her career, her main artistic concern has focused on Black female empowerment in Western culture, depicting and honoring the African diaspora. The artist is informed by the ebb and flow of contemporary society, where she seeks to reimagine new forms of aesthetic beauty, snuggled somewhere between pure love and ideological counter-hegemony. Tonight she will be speaking with us about her new book, Chronicles of Ori, which is absolutely stunning. If you don't have a copy yet, you should run, not walk, after the program to get one. She will be joined in conversation by Imani Roach, who is the inaugural director of the Brin Center for African and African Diasporic Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There, she is planning the first permanent gallery devoted to the arts of Africa and its diaspora in the PMA's 150-year history. And I think we can still call it the PMA. Imani told me that was allowed. In its 150-year history, and that's set to open in fall 2026. In this role, she also works with colleagues across the institution on educational, curatorial, and conservation initiatives that center Black art. Folks, we are in for an incredible conversation. Please join me in welcoming Harmonia Rosales and Imani Roach.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. So I'm assuming the microphone is working. Ooh, I can hear us. It's working. We're on. So nice to see all of your faces. We were talking backstage, and I was saying that actually this author series, this Free Library author series, was the very first thing that I attended when I first moved to Philadelphia. So it's such an honor to be in conversation with you about this fantastic book. This is my first time on stage, and I couldn't imagine a better occasion.
Oh, thank you.
So with that being said, so my first question is a little longer, but when I was reading this book, the word that kept coming to my mind was audacious. It's audacious, I think, for a visual artist to take the leap to creating a full-fledged novel. I think it's also audacious for anyone to tackle this subject matter, especially as personally as you do. The other night, I was in conversation with a wonderful emerging painter, Nazir Sabri, and he was saying, he was talking about how he's, started a new style in his work, and it really was something that he had to get permission for. He talked about how, the people in his life loving him allowed him to have permission. And that's also something that's been buzzing in my head as I've been reading your book, is like, who gave you permission? And I mean that not in a challenging way, right?
Yeah.
But like, where did you find the permission to take such an audacious step in your creative practice?
I would have to say my parents. They have always taught me to reach for the stars. You can do anything. So just having that mindset has just carried on throughout everything I have done. My mother was always like, she was like, you don't need to ask for someone else to do it. You can do it. It was always, you can do it. And they constantly and consistently had pushed me and gave me the courage to really make my dreams come true. So that's, in that environment and being in that environment my entire life, it just kind of prepared the land for all the things that were to come. So whether it was my art, whether it was having an idea to write this book, and so forth. Yeah.
Well, speaking of having the idea to write this book, can you share a little bit more about, what was the spark that lit the need for this?
Oh, okay. So it was an actual journey. I think it's everything that has happened in my life led to the book. So it wasn't one thing. It was a multitude of things. I wanted, I'll start from the beginning.
Yeah.
So where should I start? I grew up with these stories, around them, surrounded by them, passed down from my grandmother, who's Afro-Cuban, and she passed this down to my father, and they passed it down to me. And, life, and me as a child, I thought about these stories as kind of like fairy tales, I didn't think much of it. And then, as I got older, I moved to a smaller town, and I kind of forgot these stories, moving away from my grandmother. I mean, it was 2 hours away from my grandmother, but it might as well have been an ocean, because I was a kid. And there were so many things that I did to try to fit into the environment I was in, which wasn't quite culturally diverse. So I would say I built this mask of conformity that we often do when we don't feel connected and we want to belong. And so there were a lot of things that I felt embarrassed about. My name, people couldn't pronounce it, right? So it became Harmony, right? Don't say harmonica, all these other variations. It was embarrassing in class, like just say Harmony. Everybody knows Harmony, And not knowing these little things were etching away at my identity, right? So it was taking me further away from my roots. Didn't even speak Spanish. Going to school, they were saying, hey, look, like she can't be speaking Spanglish, we gotta understand her, only English, and so that never really quite came back. So all those things. So when you wear a mask, you make friends in that mask, right? You get married in that mask. And then being caught in this cycle, there was this disruption. It's divorce. Okay, so that was the big disruption, and it was like, it changed my whole environment. And so now I found myself back home at my parents' house, 2 kids living in my room, and I wanted to be happy again. So I took my daughter to the Art Institute to fall back in love with art, because I hadn't painted for years. So I was like, okay, let me be happy first for my kids, because I was taking care of them solely. So I took my daughter to room after room in that big, beautiful museum, showing her masterpiece after masterpiece, these roped off, priceless, beautiful paintings. And I'm there telling her, describing to her the skills, right, as an artist. But to her, it might have sounded different. So I was like, oh, look at the hair. It's flowy. You know, it's like, oh, it's like so beautiful. It kind of illuminates. Oh, look at the skin. You can see like the veins through it, right? She's supposed to be the most beautiful woman. And here I am to her probably explaining that this woman, this Eurocentric type of beauty was beautiful. And she was silent. And she looked up at me. And with her beautiful brown skin, her round features, a little halo happening with her hair from playing throughout the day. And she said, they don't look like me. And it was like, she wasn't making, you know, a profound statement or anything. I mean, she was 5, but it was a simple question, one that we often forget throughout life to ask, to observe certain things that are missing. Our histories, everything. And I wanted to swoop her up as a mother. I wanted to show her a painting where she belonged, that showed her divinity, her beauty, and I couldn't. There wasn't any. And I felt so small. I felt like I couldn't fix it. And then I began to feel that weight of that mask that I was wearing, that weighted of that conformity. And there was like the museum lights were coming down on me like I was on the stage, and it was like I had pulled back this curtain of what society was telling us, that beauty, divinity, all those things belong to my beautiful brown-skinned baby girl. So that's when I decided, you know what? That's when it came forth. There are goddesses and goddesses that look like you. There are. And so I used my skill to paint a world where she belonged. And I did that, right, for some time. That's when I really began my art career. And as I began recalling these stories and painting them, it was like I was finding myself exhibition after exhibition, orally telling these stories, just like my ancestors, because no one knew what I was painting. This is this person's this. And that's when I realized that it kind of clicked. We need these stories. We need these stories in our school systems. We need these stories alongside Greek and Norse mythology. Why haven't we learned about gods that look like us that are very similar to Greek mythology and the biblical stories, right? And so I was like, all right, I could either wait for someone to write it, or I might as well, you know, write a book I want to read myself. And that's what I did. And it was the hardest thing, trust me, it was hard. But that's what led up to it.
You know, it's interesting that you talk about how important beauty is, how important it is to your visual arts practice. It's, you know, part of your bio. I heard them talking about that being kind of core to your creative practice in general. Because when I was reading the book, I really noticed how much care and attention you give to the physical descriptions of the characters in the book, whether they be Orishas, whether they be mortals. And it felt like a real parallel. I'm gonna, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
Just to give folks, because you know, I'm assuming you haven't had a chance to read yet, a couple of examples. So this is a description of Mama Onile, who I'll have you explain who that is so that I don't butcher it for the audience.
Well, she represents Mother Nature. Just think about her like that. Yeah.
So Harmonia writes, her hair was locked and cascaded to the floor. She had the deepest brown skin. It matched the soil from which she ruled. Except for her feet, every inch of her body was adorned in the finest diamonds and gold. She sat poised as though she were always anticipating esteemed guests. Veiled behind a gold-beaded mask that concealed her face, she locked eyes on Urimole as they approached. She beckoned them to come closer so she could get a better look. They knelt before her, pleading with her to restore their memories. And it goes on. But so much of this text, I think, hinges on these very loving descriptions of how beautiful these individuals are. It's interesting to me because I think that's unusual. You know, like when you're thinking about divine figures, right? To imagine them in such specificity, right? Not just to describe them as beautiful, but to imagine them with such specificity. I wonder why that was important to you, right? Like, obviously beauty is important, but you really do, there's a real strong visual component, I would say, to the novel.
Because I wanted it to be unmistakable, what the beauty I'm describing is. And I did it specifically because I remember, and I get so sensitive about this, but when I was with my grandmother, my grandmother I thought was so beautiful. I wanted to be just like her. I said, Grandma, Mima, you are so beautiful. And she goes, oh, no, you are. I was like, no, Mima, you are so beautiful. And she goes, no, because, your skin, the light skin. And she never thought that the goddesses that she was worshiping, it has been a lot of whitewashed when it crossed the Atlantic in Cuba. And so I wanted to really emphasize the beauty of really her. So when I'm writing to her. The lines in her neck, her hair texture, her skin, it was so beautiful to me.
That's lovely. So, you mentioned the great geographic expanse, right? The fact that these gods and goddesses were carried across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, to the United States and other places. And, this novel really does span so many geographies. It spans much of Africa beyond just Yorubaland, right?
Yeah.
So it's rooted in Yoruba spirituality. We should probably get that on the table, would you say? Okay. But it incorporates like Kush and Kemet and the New World and, ancient Greek, it really encompasses much of the world, which I also found striking and audacious. That in some ways, even the Bible, right, you fold into, there are sort of biblical figures that are folded into this larger Yoruba cosmology that you're outlining. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that choice, right? This really centering the Yoruba story.
Well, Yorubaland is a migration of people, right? That's what it was made up of. But diving deeper into the history, and as I got reading about it and going beyond the stories, it was expansive, right? And so if I'm writing this mythology, I'm going to be like the Greeks did, right? Like, we created the world, all right? Let's expand this. Let's talk about migration before migration was documented. We were everywhere. So let's start from there. Then I began, so I wrote out the stories that I knew, wrote out the stories that I didn't know. And then I wanted to, there was a particular story about Oduduwa, who founded Ifa Kingdom. And they say that he came from the east. We know that. I mean, there's about 100 different versions for every tale, okay? So there was sometimes he's saying east from Yorubaland, east from Africa, or further east. And I'm like, all right, you know what? Let's be expansive further east. And what I started doing is started because there's so similar gods in indigenous cultures around the world, very similar. So I'm going to take that into consideration. And what I did is like, okay, he came from Mesopotamia, and there's a tale there where the king there, it was a king who was, he arrived on a river, and there was a gardener that adopted him. And I was like, oh, all right, this story, that indigenous story, was the basis of Nimrod from the biblical text, okay? And telling stories from different perspectives, I mean, Nimrod could be seen as evil, right? But he was really worshiping multiple gods, right? This is how this was demonized. So I was like, let's take that, Nimrod, and that could be the father of Oduduwa, who was the exiled king from the east and migrated back over there. So that's how I started connecting the stories. And so I took these sentences, one sentence, maybe two sentences from biblical texts, from Greek mythology, and created an entire persona and connected it. Because these gods have been mixed for so long within everywhere. So that's how I began really to expand it. And then also really reading on the folk tales around the continent and pulling from there. And I just really used my imagination and kind of did what Saidiya Hartman would say, critical fabulation, right? Taking that imagination and really filling in the gap of what we're missing in society. Mm-hmm.
There were so many times in reading this book when I was like, oh no, she did it. Like she just connected this whole other world. What is the response I think that you're hoping, what is the response that you're hoping people will have to those moments where you step outside of, say, the Yoruba canon, classically speaking, to bring in the Bible, bring in, Nimrod, bring in Egypt, bring in Greece?
To show how expansive and how much history is it, I want people to read it and almost get the feeling of, oh, this could be true, and analyze it, and let's talk about it. Anything that creates conversation around them is my goal. And it's to kind of connect us all. It's to reach throughout all the continents, to reach the African diaspora and reconnect us back to our roots. That's all I want. And that's what I wrote this book for, that call back.
Wonderful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the title, Chronicles of Ori, this idea of Ori. I was a little bit unsure when approaching, drafting some questions for this night, how much to ask you to explain. I should say this is a book that has a very handy glossary in the back of terms and, figures, etc. So there's a version of this question that assumes that everybody in the room knows what Ori is, but I don't think I want to ask that question, right? Like, I would love to ask the previous question, which is, what is the significance of Ori in this story? Why is it Chronicles of Ori?
The title?
Yeah.
Okay, so Ori literally means head, right? Your consciousness. But if you think about it, it's really, when you're really connected to who you are, and you listen to that voice in your head, it can lead you to your destiny, right? That's what I felt that has happened to me. I was pulling away so hard, and I didn't want to become an artist because everybody was telling me, it doesn't pay the bills. And so I was really just moving further away, trying to find myself, when all along, this is what I should have been, doing. And so when I finally listened to it, and I was like, no, Dad, I don't want to get remarried. Okay, I want to become an artist. That's when I really found myself. So Ori, how I explain it in the book, is that ultimate God in your head, the one that guides you. And to live in it, it lives in the garden of your mind. And that's when you have the right balance. That's when you know who you are and you're grounded, right? So think of it as like that garden. And as long as you tend to that garden and you keep it lush and you keep it beautiful and you don't let anything infiltrate it, the Ori is happy and you can hear it and it can guide you to where you need to be. So the book Chronicles of Ori is, since these stories are meant to be digested and retold to help you out through your life, to help you to reach your destiny, that's what this book is. It's the stories I digested and I retold and reimagined to connect us back to our roots. So it's like my version. I'm not saying this is the version. It's my version. Yeah.
I think because of this through line of the importance of the head of the Ori, which is core to Yoruba spirituality,
right.
core to the book, there's so much really beautiful language that really explores the complexity of the human psyche, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting into desire, jealousy, you're getting into, like the tensions between, one's destiny and one's sort of the path that they're on. I mean, there's a really, really beautiful nuanced discussion that was so resonant for me in terms of like my own psychological experience. I think there's something quite universal about it, which is I think also why Yoruba spirituality does in fact apply and could in fact apply as broadly as you've cast it geographically, because it's like we all human beings have these really complex inner worlds. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm wondering, it's really unusual to have a book that is rooted in spirituality that is also so human, where, all of the divine figures are painted in ways that are so human, that are so flawed, that are so recognizable to the reader. And I'm curious about how you went about kind of sketching out these personalities, right? Because for me, as an art historian, I know who Obatala is, right? I know who Yemaya is, but you've created this really beautiful inner world for each of these figures that made me see them in a totally different way and also made me see myself in a different way.
Because they're not like idols on these pedestals that it's unreachable. They're a part of us, and we can invoke any of them depending on our moods, whether our blood boils and we're angry, call on Ogun, but they're also aspects of nature. And when you think about them as having flaws, you think of them as being human, right? As us. So I wanted each Orisha, the ones I chose, I mean, there's 4,000 more. But I stuck to just 7 so people can just be introduced to these Orishas. But I wanted them to have an arc themselves, a transformation, because we all are not the same person we are 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We're constantly evolving, and that's how I wanted them to be. They constantly evolved, and when we think about them as not only having human qualities, we think of them also, again, as nature gods. And if you think about it as nature gods, you call upon them to help you with the garden. So you help to tend to it, right? To help. So it's those kind of aspects. And then I was like, all right, let me go further and let me create these. What do they fight against? Now, I could make them fight against colonialism, as in, okay, there's this white slave master, but I did not want to further divide the color line, right? I'm trying to bring people together, not separate people. So let me stick to nature. Let me think, all right, the 7 European powers, right? They're the animals. Then let me think about what is the catalyst? What is the motive of colonization, manipulation, power, right? Control. Greed, all right? What is all consuming that's even happening now? Erasure, right? So strangler fig. You know, I think of a strangler fig. I think of us as a tree planted in our roots, and I think of a strangler fig consuming. And so that's another aspect in there, and they're fighting that. And so, yeah, with all that, I'm trying to create a new kind of understanding that we are them and they are us. We're each a god to somebody, right? A mentor or whatever. And we're connected in so many ways. And that's the different understanding than, perhaps maybe, other understandings of religion. But I really want to show that we control and we can contribute to community. Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about another theme that I saw again and again in the book, which is around justice. And it made me wonder, first of all, over what span of time this book was written. Like, when did you start? How long did it take you?
So the idea started about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And the actual sitting down nonstop was about 2-3 years ago. Yeah.
I've been reading it over the past month, during which the world has been absolutely on fire.
Yes.
Not that it wasn't, in some ways before. And so it's, I think, been extremely timely for me, the moment of its release, to have such an insistence on reflection on this idea of justice. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about either in your view or in relationship to, in the book or in the larger sort of, Yoruba spiritual sphere, what is the importance of justice?
Importance of justice. It doesn't always come in the form we expect it to come. I guess that's the main thing. And sometimes I would think that I would actually just put a period on that.
Yeah.
It never so justice in the sense of everything that's happening in the world today, or I think of it as cycles of cycles. That's all. And it's interesting writing this book, talking about how these gods became masked and hidden and forgotten. It's kind of the same almost cycle that's almost happening now, being pushed to, forget, being pushed to, so it's just in a different mask itself, So that's why it's more important, instead of seeking and fighting, it's to reclaim. That's what I'm thinking of. That is what this is. This is my weapon of choice. It's about reclaiming and really, because no one can take away or erase one's identity unless you allow it to. So that's my whole theme of justice in there, is remembering.
Oh. You've mentioned a couple times now that not only are the original stories that you've called together to create this novel orally transmitted, but there's also many versions of these stories.
Many, yes.
And so how did you get your mind around what version? Also, I've noticed that I feel like for certain characters or Orishas, you're almost pulling from different versions at different times.
Yeah.
So how did you, because that feels like a massive task, how did you go about that?
It was. Okay, so writing a modern mythology, first I had to think about, all right, writing something modern, we have to think about what science has discovered now, right? If I want people to get into this book, it can't go with the version of the creation of the world of Obatala coming down with the shell, and the seeds, and then you got the chicken, planting. I'm like, first of all, how was there chickens if there was no life? I'm thinking kind of logically, How can we get into a beautiful story, a beautiful concept, but how okay, let me try to rework this here. And that's how I began to choose. And it's like, all right, also thinking about what God came first. all right, there wasn't any soil there, right? There was water, and you think about Olokun, and you think about, so this is how I began, like, okay, trying to organize the versions of the stories, but also thinking about that, you know, some of them combined, right? There's a lot of gods that combined. And so when I was reading other stories and thinking about it, I'm like, wait, this personality sounds way different than this personality. Maybe those were two different. So I was using my own creative license to try to decipher who was who, which came first, what story I was going to tell, and it was really a labyrinth. That's why it took me so long to write it, to actually sort it out. The big issue was what I did not write, what I had to take out in order for it to be not so, everybody won't be lost, that everybody can at least, you know, have an understanding of, you know, just a general concept. Because I really wrote this for people who may not even be in it, who may not even heard about these, you know, African gods. I want it to be easy enough. But yeah, that's how I kind of sorted out. I looked at how the world was created, you know, so I really reconnected or really dived into the cosmology of the creation of Earth in Yoruba, and that lined up with the Big Bang almost, and so that's how, yeah.
I mean, this does go back to my original question, because I do think there's something really audacious about taking creative license in that way. Yeah. And that struck me immediately when I started reading the book. And I really want to understand where that comes from, right? Like where you get that courage, where you get that, or maybe it's freedom, maybe it's not courage, right? But like to be able to move so nimbly between these different versions, select what serves and leave what doesn't serve. I think there's a reason why this book hasn't been written before. Yeah. Right?
Right.
And I think that's partially because it would be very difficult. It is very difficult to do what you've done. Yeah. And I do want to maybe push you just a little bit to like, what is that like, you know, to be able to have that level of freedom?
I guess because I stay in my studio, really. I'm just with my family. I don't go out. And so I don't listen to anybody. When I create these, I make sure it's backed up, though. Okay. So I'm not just choosing just to choose. It's like it has to make sense. Yeah. And it's reaching my ultimate goal. So we can fight all the time, and you know, there's people that are not gonna, you know, like, wait, that's not right, you know, but that's okay, because my bigger message right now is not about the little nitpicking and the details. It's right now what we need to work on is unmasking these gods. Yeah. That's what I think we need. We need to have a mythology within the Western canon. You know, when we have the Greek and Norse, and then we have movies coming out. I mean, like, we need something to build upon. I'm not saying I'm the only one, you know, or I'm not like homogenizing Blackness in any kind of way, but I'm creating something to show, like, all right, we need to start asking why we don't learn about these. We need to start asking, like, why do they try so hard to erase them? Because there's something so powerful. They're trying to keep us separate as much as possible. And if you notice, within just our society, we're just playing right along with it, you know? We're so busy caught in the smoke and mirrors and not looking at the bigger picture. You know, I'm not African. Don't call me African American. I'm not this, I'm not that. When we really come together, we can be so powerful and really create change and really build from a solid foundation, because they're not allowing us to right now.
I want to talk a bit about the choice to include your beautiful paintings in the text. I don't know that I've ever read like an almost 300-page book that also has gorgeous illustrations. It was such a treat. Why did you decide to lay the book out that way?
I'm an artist first. So I had a favorite book that was The Wizard of Oz, and it was a novel. It was done in the 1980s. And it had these beautiful illustrated images in them. And that was the only thing that got me through this novel because I couldn't wait to get to the image and visualize it. But also, I wanted the gods to look a certain way and it to be undeniable. Now, I could have had this with Penguin Classics. I was working with them for months as I was completing the book. But Penguin Classics, they don't do images. So I'm here on the phone with my team, and they're like, okay, we don't do images though, but we love the book. And I'm like, no, okay, can you direct me to anybody else? And my team was like, how do you say no to Penguin Classics, And I was like, I need it a certain way. They have been, you don't understand, they have been whitewashed. It has to be, I have to have these images. I have to. And then, so it ended up with W.W. Norton, which they're amazing. They're like, oh yeah, we'll have all the images. And even Penguin came back and was like, wait a minute. We might let you do the cover. And then I was like, no. So I think that the images, this is what started my career again. This is also it visually shows the beauty in us, and it needed to be within the text. They go hand in hand, Yeah. It's okay if it's like a novel. I mean, for grown-ups, we like looking at images too.
We do.
Yeah.
I think I got a 2-minute sign. I thought, yes, I saw a 2-minute sign coming down the aisle almost 2 minutes ago, maybe. So that means that it's time to open up for audience questions. I'm sure there are many. So we've got folks coming down the aisles. And I guess raise your hand if you have a question. And I'll call on you, and then just wait for the microphone to arrive. Yes, the beautiful cowrie shells in the front.
Hi. I really don't have a question because I'm kind of like artist fangirling right now. But I just want to say to you that as someone who grew up practicing Ifa and Yoruba, this is amazing. Because I grew up listening to some of those stories too, but never had the visual. And I'm probably gonna cry because as a dark-skinned girl who's also an artist who never saw myself in anything, seeing your work years ago brought me to my knees.
Oh, thank you.
Because I never saw myself in anything I saw in art museums. I never saw brown skin that looked like mine. I never saw hair that looked like mine. When I went to art school, I got kicked out of art history because my teacher was not of our complexion, and everything they talked about was just not of, it wasn't anything other than European and Eurocentric beauty. And whenever I brought up questions, they would always get defensive, and he brought me after class and was like, your questions and stuff like that, it causes a certain culture, in the class. And I just need you to tone it down. And I refused because I was like, this is college, we're paying to be here. How dare you call yourself an art historian and you're not teaching anything else?
Right.
When there's a plethora of Black art and Black artwork that you could possibly be talking about. So for you, your art for me is everything. And as a mother who's also teaching my children about Yoruba, about Ifa, about the importance of our culture and of us, this book is going home to my kids.
Thank you.
And you are just amazing. And thank you. Thank you. Just thank you.
There's someone in the very back.
Hi, this is amazing. So my question is a little bit more focused on your practice as an artist. It's very clear that, African spirituality is at the core of this book. But then again, you guys talk about the complexities of more of these micro realities and the psychological aspect of it. So I'm interested to know, there's obvious ways in your work that you subvert or challenge more typical, canonical, technical things in your work. how do you kind of find that balance and reconcile between like some of the themes that are addressed in like continental philosophy and bring that together with this like modern mythology that you talk about? So like, you know, the sublime, beauty, things like that that are typically like, you know, the starting point for a lot of that comes out of Europe, I guess, in a more like larger discourse. And you definitely subvert that in your work. So I'm interested to kind of know how you find that balance for yourself in trying to create this story that makes sense and has logic and a lot of these things that are just rooted in a very Eurocentric, you know, place.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding right, how do I just paint or describe such complex issues? Is that kind of, is what is...
I guess how, so there's a tradition that you're following that is,
right.
Yeah, very clear and in the canon of art history, right? And when you think of mastery painters, right? But at the same time, you have this obvious subversion that's happening with painting Black figures.
I got it. Right.
What are other ways, I guess, in your work that you do that might not be as obvious? And how do you kind of balance, I guess, the origins of continental philosophy that kind of guide some of those psychoanalytical, like, you know, just these, I would say like a tradition that a lot of us embody in thinking about history, right? How do you balance that and create a narrative that is so expansive, does align with science in a way and logic?
Wow, okay. I'm gonna try to answer it as best as possible. And I wanna make sure I understand your question again. And you're saying, and did you?
There are aspects of it. I mean, I resonate with that question on some level to the extent that I understand it. I think you're highlighting the fact that your work is so kind of classically beautiful in a way, so it belongs in a certain style, perhaps, that is kind of classical.
So it's a classical style. Is that what we're?
Possibly, is that part of what you're asking about? And
I'm sorry.
Not that it necessarily belongs, but if to think about like this tradition in the canon, right? And then thinking about the canon of philosophy, right? And so you're challenging that with this mythology that you're creating. And there's obvious ways that you're doing that, but my question is kind of what technical aspects of your work are less obvious that we might not pick up on that are challenging that? And in addition to that, how do you just balance that, I guess?
So you're talking about the symbology that I use and that kind of thing, and how do I do that? Well, we could talk about, let's see. For example, here, right? This is, you have 2 or 3 of the European powers chasing Eve, who Eve embodies. She's she embodies the migration of. Can you get to the? Thank you. She embodies the migration of people that cross the Atlantic. Okay, so that's who she symbolizes, and because she's like, think of the mother to the diaspora. And she is, can I go back? Yeah. Oh, it won't let me go back. Here we go. Can we pause that on that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so she's invoking Ogun to help fight, to keep her stories from being absorbed into the manuscripts. Their stories being absorbed into the manuscripts below here. So that's this particular one, that symbology. There's another one where, and I'm sorry if this is not working, there's a serpent, a golden serpent. The golden serpent came from a folktale. And I wanted to, the symbol of gold. Well, we can talk about it right here, the symbol of gold. At one point, that our bodies, our Black bodies, was worth more than gold. So I use that a lot in illuminating the skin as a beautiful contrast. And also, can we go to the snake one, please? Here is utilizing gold, symbolizing greed as well. This was the Trans-Sahara trade routes. So this came from a folktale, the seven-headed golden serpent from Wagadu Empire. And I took that and expanded it because it was one of the first mass slave trades that happened. And so even though you look at it and it's beautiful, right? You see some stuff that looks like it's kind of like that, you know, the Renaissance-y type style. It says something so more complex, but in a way, which is why I love using mythology, because you can use a lot of symbology and metaphors to explain something so vast. And that's how I utilize this. There's another one where I don't think I have it on here, but you'll see a lot of the strangler fig, right? And I describe the strangler fig as, if anybody doesn't know how it grows, it starts from the branch down and entwines the tree and wraps around the tree. And then once it reaches the roots and takes its nutrient, the tree dies, and then it blossoms its fruit for a bird to eat and then spread again. So when you think about us as that tree, right, you think about our roots being deep into the continent, that trunk that emerges from those roots being the Black Atlantic, sturdy, strong, coming from survival. And then you think about the branches that emerge from that trunk throughout all the continents and blossoming its own fruit. Think of that as the diaspora, right? And so what happens is the seed lands on the weakest link, which is the branch, trying to cauterize us from our roots. And so that whole concept is another very complex concept that I utilize consistently in my work, even in you'll see like it infiltrating the garden. You don't want manipulation and control to seep from your garden, you know, to take you away from your destiny. So those are, I hope I answered some of the things, yeah.
There's a masked person, yes, waving their hand right there.
I can't see.
So I just have to say that this is like, and forgive me for the word salad that's about to come out of my mouth, but this is absolutely brilliant. As somebody within the tradition, seeing the attention to detail in terms of Yemoja and her big breast and those stories, it feels absolutely unifying. But one of the questions I had about the depiction of Ori and that sort of like Rococo style palette, which, you know, we see that like in Europe that era was associated with like opulence and like in a period of enjoyment.
Right.
Was your use of that intentional?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, it kind of goes throughout all my work, right? How I use the style, the style I use, how I reimagine certain paintings. I utilize the familiarity of these masterful works that we are taught that's, you know, priceless, right? That it's beautiful. And what I do is I just switch it out, right? There's similar stories, you know, different cultures, and different meanings. And so, but what I did is it creates this bridge of familiarity, like you said, right? You look at it like, oh, I know something like this. I know this image, and it kind of makes it approachable, right? When these gods are seen as, you know, again, sinful, right? It brings you in. It could bring all cultures in, wanting to know more. And so having that bridge of familiarity is my way of trying to mainstream these gods as fast as possible without the knowledge that we have or that we're even learning, that we're not learning in school. So again, that's how I created the book. That's how I kind of wrote it in a Western kind of understanding, and not so much more of African spirituality, because my ultimate goal is to incorporate these stories through K through 12. So, because I think those are the impressionable ages, because right now, our Black youth, if you really step back, that they're learning that their stories begin in chains, and it doesn't. So this goes beyond the docs. And can you imagine growing up and knowing that, hey, look, I came from divinity in these, these kingdoms, and imagine how others see us as well. So.
And I salute you for what you've created for us. Thank you.
Just behind.
I echo everyone with just how wonderful it is to hear you speak about your book. I wonder, do you have a favorite story, and do you have a favorite image? And if so, what are they?
All of them are like my favorite. I've invoked so much energy with each painting. I would say, like, not particular story, but I do like the whole relationship between, or from my understanding, between Chango and Oya, right, the goddess of the winds, and then Chango, that thunder and that lightning, the storms. Because I remember as a child, my father would take us up to the roof, and we would sit on there as the storms gathered. My mother would be panicking because my babies are gonna fall off the roof, but it was so beautiful seeing those, telling myself like, oh my God, there's Oya and Chango preparing, And then when the rain came, having to hide, and me running out and playing in the rain and feeling like I'm a part of a culmination. And when that happened, and being just in the mud and everything, I felt like I was a part of this world, that I never felt quite like alone. And that's the beauty in kind of understanding these stories and who they are, because you feel like, you're not alone, So I guess I would say them too. It's my favorite.
There was a gentleman down front in the blue.
Hi, Harmonia. It's a pleasure seeing you in person. And thank you for all your wonderful works, your art, and all the passion and dedication you've put into your storytelling. I just have a very simple question is, what is the sum of your ambition? All this effort you've kept to storytell and to make sure that this knowledge passes on through time. What is it that you're actually looking to either solve or to create or to impact through time?
Where the source of my ambition began with my grandmother, because she preserved these stories. Knowing my grandfather, he wasn't quite into it as much as she was, but she was very strong in her identity. She refused to learn English being in America. She was like, she held on to this. And since this was the most valuable thing she could pass down, I'm honoring it by passing it down to and even just amplifying it more. But I feel like it's so important because looking at my children who grew up with these images, this is the only thing they've seen, is they have this built-in guard against anything that comes and tries to erase their identity or attack them in any way. My daughter, she loves the way she looks. No one can tell her anything. She's not thinking about changing anything about herself. She's empowered, and so is my son. And just to see that, can you imagine if our youth, our Black youth sees it? How would we perceive ourselves? How would they grow up? And how would they carry themselves? And again, how others are really, that's my drive, is seeing that I want to do this for our future generation. Because I want to see it. I want to see what we can create from it. Like, can you imagine creating not from survival and the weight of it, but from empowerment, I think about my side, my other side of me, the Jewish side, right? They don't define their stories by the Holocaust. They define their stories by the Exodus, by mythology, and that gives them their strength. And so that's all I want for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more? Okay. We have time for one more question. I'm going to call on you.
So you mentioned Sadia Hartman, who I adore. She could write a book on like the history of Black women and hairpins, and I'm like, I'm sad. So in terms of not only just maybe artists that you connect with visually that pour into your practice, but maybe from with Black women and feminism, our own personal female empowerment, like who are some, would it be like Ama'ata Adu, Barbara Smith, like who are some that like you really pull from that also help you with your creativity?
Sylvia Winter, another good one, Jamaican, amazing. I liked her whole concept of, and I love this quote, and I'm probably paraphrasing because I don't know exactly, but until we defined what it is to be human, then institutions will tell us who is important and who isn't, right? And so that whole concept is like, oh, that drives me a lot. That and Hartman as well. I think those are my two primary female, female like leaders for me. You know, that do empower me to create these stories, that do tell me that it's okay to take the fragments of our history, you know, put in your own imagination and fill in the gap of, or not the gap, but, you know, to place that into the archive. Thank you.